All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our May Quick Tips. For those of you who are new, I am Morgan Stentz, and I'm the Roving Archivist with the Roving Archivist Program here in Wyoming. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that today's meeting is recorded and will be available on the Wyoming State Archives' YouTube page. I would also like to thank our sponsors for today. This program is only made possible thanks to the American Heritage Center, the Wyoming State Archives, and the Wyoming State Historic Records Advisory Board. And this program is funded by grants made available through the Wyoming SHRAB by the National Historic Publications and Records Commission and administered by the Wyoming State Archives, which is part of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Before we get into the topic for today, I'd like to ask everyone to save their questions for the end or place them in the chat for us to go over during the questions portion of the session. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our newest quick tip session, Accessible Exhibits for Cultural Heritage Institutions. And with that, I will hand over today's meeting to our speaker, Katrina Zarelli.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing good today. Welcome to the Accessibility and Exhibits for Archives, Museums, and Cultural Heritage Centers. My name is Katrina, and I'm excited to be here virtually with you guys. So a little bit about me. I'm a Ph.D. candidate at Middle Tennessee State University, working on my dissertation and making the public history field accessible specific to museums and historical sites. I also have my ADA coordinator certification from the Great Plains ADA Center, and I am currently a reference librarian and archivist at the Mandel Public Library of West Palm Beach down in Florida. I am currently working with our archives and special collections, and we actually just got a grant, so the entire archives and special collections is about to become very accessible to everyone. I also have my work email, my work phone, so if anyone would ever like to send me in questions, you're more than welcome to. I'm pretty available to everyone. Some things we're going to be going over today is what exactly ADA is, how to make exhibits accessible with universal design, and how to do quick, easy assessments of your institutions that you already have set up. And then I will give you guys some resources, which I will share with Morgan at the end so she can send it to you guys if you would like. So what is the American Disabilities Act? The ADA are standards for accessible design, which says that it is required for a building or facility to be physically accessible to people with disabilities. And what does that exactly mean? It means that ADA is specifically for new constructed buildings and facilities and any renovations that a building can be undergoing. ADA actually has very little to do with exhibits. The only time it has anything to do with exhibits is just making sure that anything is about 3.5 feet away from each other, so it's easily maneuverable for someone who may have a physical assistive device like a wheelchair. ADA is very much to do with the building itself and whether someone who is disabled can enter or exit a building comfortably, and if they are able to move around a building using like the elevators, and if their bathrooms are accessible. So that's really what ADA is. How to make exhibits accessible is more towards looking at universal design. And universal design is this idea of creating spaces or experiences that work for everyone, regardless of age, ability, or background, without needing any special accommodations. Instead of designing something for like the average person and then adding accommodations later on, universal design builds in accessibility from the very start. And that way you don't have to worry about accommodations later on. Universal design has 7 different principles. The idea is that each section of an exhibit, whether that's the labels and the text in your exhibits or just the actual like physical part of the exhibit, is all very accessible for individuals. And these are all of the 7. I won't go into every single one. I do know when I go for like assessments on different places, one of the biggest ones that I always see is that sometimes locations will use bigger words to be more academic, and you kind of want to do the opposite with universal design, and really focusing on the writing things that are very easily understandable for everyone. And then I have some quick universal design reference guides, and this is actually from the Museum of Science in Boston. This goes through different ways to make sure that your exhibit space is able to be maneuvered correctly, and then also that you're not leaving anyone to maneuver the space that won't be able to functionally accessible, like make it functionally accessible. For example, for the top right corner where you see the head clearance, I'm going to use this example because I was just at a historical site that has a diagonal roof. For places that do have that angle of the roof, you'll find that people who can see, they'll be able to know that they'll hit their head when they walk towards it. For those who, like in the example, are blind or unable to have full visibility, you'll want something that kind of stops them from walking and hitting the head clearance. So for historical homes that have those roofs, having a trunk there, or even having like an exhibit table that can stop someone from walking that far, would be a great way to make the space more universally designed. So it's not just for somebody who is able to view. And then this is a more close-up of what was at the bottom of the screen. But this is more for our labels and our texts. And for text, you always want it to be like 22 or above. I always recommend the 28 to 32 for your text. If you have labels that have like a white background, you always want it to have a really dark gray or black text on it. And then serif texts or typefaces are really good because they're very easily distinguished. You can read them really easily. The letters are all evenly spread out so that someone with, say, dyslexia can actually read the text without having too much of a problem. And then you never want labels to be more than 55 characters long, and a character is like a letter or any punctuation mark. So what does this mean for our exhibits in day-to-day? Exhibits should make content accessible to different intellectual levels. So for example, we all know what initiate means. Instead of using that word, use the word start, because start is a word that everyone would know. And it's kind of really focusing towards those who might not have a level above like a middle school educational level. And that's really also good for if your institutions have like school groups that come in. That way it makes it apparent that children or students that come in are also able to completely understand the information being given. And then items in the exhibit should be completely visible and have no obstructions. So as you can see in the picture, the documents are all kind of facing up. So that way it's easily viewable. No one's kind of hanging over the glass to try to read the items. Labels should be designed to be legible for all visitors. So making sure that the fonts, that 28 to 32 range, that's not super long, that it's in a serif type of type font. And then anything that's wall mounted should be at least 27 inches from the floor. And you might have noticed that in 2 slides ago where it was like the physical universal design reference sheet. The 27 inches from the floor actually gives somebody who might be in a wheelchair the ability to roll up to the exhibit without hitting their knees, and they'll be able to clearly see the items. And then if you have any audio interactives in your exhibits, to make sure that there are some type of written options. So I know in my exhibit at work, we have a video. I make sure the subtitles are on, and I check that every morning just to be sure that someone who might not have great hearing or who are deaf are able to at least understand what's happening in the video and understand the context. And then all labels and text should also be available to all languages within your demographic. So West Palm Beach is, we have a very high demographic of Spanish speakers. So everything within my collections, I have translated into Spanish. So that way it's easily accessible for those who might not speak English as a native language. And they still get that information for the history context and what they're researching. How to do a really quick, accessible assessment of your building. One of the things is always looking for physical access. I find that when I go do assessments, sometimes like the accessible entrances might not be at the front, but there are around the building. I would just always make sure that those are easily marked. So someone who's walking up to the building who is looking for a way to enter isn't questioning where to go. And then just making sure there's elevators available if you have a second floor. If you do have a second floor and elevators are not available, I highly recommend just like taking pictures of the space on the second floor and having it in the binder. So someone who's walking in who can't walk those stairs or go up there for any other reason is able to at least view the space. And then just making sure there's plenty of seating. Sensory accessibility options are always visual aids or audio guides. Those who are deaf can't hear, so you want to make sure they're able to visibly read any information they need. And then someone who's blind cannot see, so you just want to make sure that there's that audio option for them as well. And then quiet spaces, there are a lot more neurodivergence that we are seeing, so we want to make sure that the space is really accommodating to them. That way they can also enjoy places that are interesting and that we love. And then just making sure staff is trained in accommodations. You don't need to know sign language, but knowing basics like hello or help, or even just knowing that if you don't know sign language, just you can write on a piece of paper, that's completely okay. And then if you have the options, if your institutions do like educational tours, maybe doing special tours for school groups that do have like students with disabilities, that way they can also experience your museums or institutions as well. And then feedback is really great. Just having maybe like a Dropbox. We have a Dropbox at the archive where I am at. And that way I can just see any feedback anyone from the community would like to see or need, or even if it's just getting something more for the exhibit or the museum or historical site, wherever you're at. And then these are all the resources. I really like the Gaylord Archival has different webinars as well. And the first and the second one are actually from Gaylord Archival. They're free to use and they do a really great job. And then a couple of other things from like the Smithsonian that goes through different accessible exhibit designs from them. And they're really great and they break it down into really great detail. So it's awesome. But yeah, does anyone have any questions for me? I know that was kind of quick, so I can go back.
Yeah. So Kat, when you've designed exhibits and materials thinking about accessibility, what would you say are your go-to habits to make sure it's the most accessible it can be?
So I always triple check my text. I want to make sure that there's not too much text on a panel so someone wouldn't be able to like read through everything. I also always check which typeface I'm using because I really love what I do. So I want to make sure other people are able to at least understand what we do. And then I always try to make sure that any display tables that I have, you're able to come up to them, and someone who's in a wheelchair wouldn't be hitting their knees. They would be able to actively be able to see everything and read all of the labels inside my displays. And those are kind of things that I do. I mostly focus on the deaf and blind community, so those are my go-tos for those communities.
And then when you're working on materials for like alternate text or creating audio files, what are some recommendations you have for developing those materials?
So I'm really lucky because at my job we have a multilingual librarian who is more than happy to change text for me whenever I ask. I also have a stepmom and a whole step family that speaks Spanish, so they're able to translate text for me. Google Translate isn't always great, but if you do use it, I would just put at the bottom of, if you're using a QR code, if you're using a binder with the different languages in them, just making a note at the bottom saying that Google Translate was used in this option, because someone who's coming in and is already not sure if they're going to be able to understand the information. If they see that, they'll be like, okay, so there might be mistakes, but they'll still appreciate the opportunity to get that information in their language.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
So when you have two languages, let's say, on a label, is it on a label that's in the case, or is there like a binder that translates the label? Because I'm trying to imagine in a display case, you have a ton of labels already. How do you compensate for double the text is basically what you would need.
I'm a big fan of QR codes. So the way that I have it in our exhibit space, I have the QR codes kind of when you first walk in, it's on the one wall when you first walk in. So you're hit with it and it gives you the different languages. So like we have Spanish, we have Haitian Creole, and we actually have Russian. Those are our three big demographics in West Palm. And the QR codes are there. And then at the bottom, I have a sentence that says, if you don't have a smartphone and you would like to have a physical copy of the information, please visit the reference desk, which is right outside the space. And so I have 3 binders there with information. And then I have the QR codes. And so everything's kind of switched in there. So like if you scan it, it'll go through it. And then I have numbers on all of our labels. So like 1 would in the label case, and then it would show 1 in the QR code when you open it. So that way they can kind of keep track of what they're reading and where it is located.
A QR code to what though? Like what does it link to? Like, is it part of your website or how does that work?
It's a PDF file.
Okay.
Yeah, I have it linked to a PDF file. I don't know which system we use, but I can get that for you and actually send it to Morgan so she can pass it along.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I have a question actually. So I'm just starting out as a curator, and part of my job is writing descriptions and for particular items in our collections. And you mentioned trying to write in a way that's accessible to people with different intellectual abilities. And my tendency is to use a little bit of anthropological jargon because my background is in anthropology. So do you have any tips for doing that and kind of balancing like a depth of description while making it accessible for people who may not understand?
Yeah, so I completely understand. I'm also an adjunct professor at MTSU, so I use a lot of academic language. I try to kind of turn off that part of my brain and read it as somebody who maybe stopped at like a high school level, a middle school level. I'm also really lucky that I can depend on my family members to kind of help me. My mom is an immigrant, so she doesn't have a very high educational level. And so I ask her when I'm not sure if she can read it and understand what I'm trying to say. And if she can't, then I know I have to change something up. But I would just have, if you're looking at it and you're unsure, have somebody else look at it too. Like there's never, it's never like a bad thing to have multiple eyes on something.
Okay, thank you.
I also kind of have an answer for the description writing and using jargon, because I also use a lot of jargon just in everyday. But I try to make a list when I'm discussing my topic of like words that I had to learn in order to understand the topic fully for when I'm describing it for others. So that way I can then try to switch them out as I'm writing the description for other groups and other people. So
that feels like cheating, so I'll have
a
to
little bit, but
give it a shot though. Thank you.
yeah,
That's a good idea.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just one way I do it. So, but yeah, are there any other questions? All right. Well, I will go ahead and wrap up this session then. So thank you, Katrina, for sharing all of these practical implementations for creating accessible exhibits for us today. For our next session in June, it will be on Conservation Made Simple with Beverly Perkins, and that will take place. We're switching from Thursdays to Fridays. So it'll be Friday, June 26th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. If you have any questions that come up after we log off, please feel free to reach out to me, or Kat, do you want to display your contact information again?
Sure.
Perfect. So you can reach out to either of us. And then I will also put the Roving Archivist contact information in the chat. I know many of you already have it, but just in case. Otherwise, thank you all for attending today, and we'll see you next time.